All right, welcome to Talking Texas Vouchers podcast. This is our first episode, and we're going to be I'll just be the host here, no guests this show. It'll be kind of some foundational discussions here, talking about the types of schools. A lot of folks out there are, really just used to the public schools and private schools, and maybe charter schools are a little bit vague on what they are, homeschooling, if they've never homeschooled, what some of the natures are of that. And we're going to talk about a couple of other types of programs that are out there that might not be so widely known. Okay. Also, I'm going to be probably a little more descriptive. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that people can download to get a little more context and comparisons. It'll be available on the podcast site as well as on the YouTube site for download, and you can follow along if you'd like. And then again, some people listen to the audio only, so I'll try to be a little more descriptive as I go through some of the slides. So bear with me for people that are watching the video. Okay, next slide here. Okay, so what we're trying to do with this is we're trying to understand the landscape of education and possible use of vouchers. Depending upon the future legislation, it has not been presented at the time of this podcast, so we can only kind of look to what maybe has been in some of the previous legislation that didn't pass. And so what we want to do is want to talk about the educational system that includes various school types that can cater to various diverse needs. Some of the key factors, governance, curriculum, how they're funded, and accessibility. And then the main purpose of this presentation is to explore the various school types in the context of the Texas Education Vouchers programs and the possible use of the vouchers for each school type, depending upon where things might go with the legislation. Okay, so the types of schools we're going to talk about, for those just listening, I have a table up here, and it presents in columns public schools, charter schools, private schools, and home schools. And I do have a column that's empty because I want to talk a little bit about a fifth type of school that's maybe a lot of people don't know about. And so, but I'll get to that. I'm going to just talk about these four core ones that most everybody knows about. Okay, the first one is the public school. Definition is schools funded and operated by government entities. The funding sources are local property taxes, state funding, and federal funding. And the key features of these public schools is it's free to all students within the designated district. It is governed by school boards and state regulations, and the curriculum is fairly broad, but it is designed to meet the state standards. And so most of the school districts do have some leeway into what they present in their curriculum. And so it is fairly regulated within the district based on the school board for the district. So I'm going to put this in a table, and the table is this first column called public. And it's the funding is by the state and the local and federal government. It's free to all students. And this does include things like magnet schools and specialized schools, students with disabilities, those kind of things. So we have schools for the blind and schools for the deaf and those kind of things that are specialized schools. Okay, next we're going to talk about charter. That's the next column in the table. Charter schools are, kind of definition is publicly funded but independently operated schools. These funding sources are state and federal funding, but they are on a per pupil allocation. So as the student population grows within a charter program, the more funding they get to cover those. Charter schools also sometimes go out and get grants and private donations, and that sometimes helps add funds to improve the charter program for those that attend. So it is kind of a mixture of it's sometimes kind of that nonprofit flavor. Key features on this, it is operated under a charter or a contract with the state and local boards. So these different charter schools have different programs, and so not all charter schools are the same. They have a lot greater flexibility in the curriculum and the management of the school, and the accountability is for student performance. So a lot of these charter schools do have attendance requirements and those kind of things that public schools also have, because they are state funded and federally funded. So I put this now into a second column, and you'll notice the colors of these two columns are the same. The funding is by the state and federal, and some grants and private donations, and they are free to students. So if you'll notice, the first columns for public and charter are both a light blue because they are free to the students. There is no tuition generally for charter and definitely not public. And the next one we're going to talk about are private schools. So these are schools funded and managed independent of government entities. So the funding sources are tuitions, fees paid by the families. And then these private schools do go out and get endowments and private donations to improve the overall funding for the school. And then they sometimes have fundraising events and other grants that they go after to add additional funds beyond the tuition paid by the family. Now, some of the key features of private schools are there's a wide variety on curriculum and extracurricular options. So in this case, we have a lot of religious schools that fall under this. Sometimes we even have sports schools that cater to high-performing athletes, and they come to the private school to get hyper-focused on their sport. And then there's plenty of schools that maybe have really targeted, really strong football teams, those kind of things that private schools sometimes focus on. And then they're often associated with religious or philosophical beliefs. And then there is a selective admission process, meaning that you have to apply, you have to be selected to be involved with the school. So it is not open to everybody. You have to put in and submit for admission and then be selected. Okay, now this goes into a third column here in the diagram of the table, and that's the private. It does have a different color than public because this is funded by families. There is a tuition, and these can also have, and then the funding is endowments, private donations, and then tuition. These can also have specialized schools. They could be the arts programs or students with disabilities, religious schools, and then we also talked about sports. So these private schools can have different nuances to just beyond the education. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is homeschools. By definition, this is education led by the parents or a tutor at home. The funding sources are family funded. This pays for materials, curriculums, and other resources. So completely family funded. At present in Texas, there is no outside funding for homeschooling, and so families have to completely fund this. Some states do offer some tax credits and stipends, but that's not in the case of Texas right now. Other states do have some funds that families can apply for. The features highly personalized learning experience. This is the parent and child relationship where they're picking what kinds of courseware they want to cover, what style it is, how it's presented. Most often it's the parent that's the teacher, and it's very flexible. Sometimes they have class at night while the parents maybe are going to work or something like that. The curriculum is handpicked by the families, or they can leverage outside resources to drive some of that curriculum. And then there is a strong parental involvement typically. So that puts that in the far right corner. It's a green in color because the family is completely funding that for the curriculum and the resources. Okay, the next one I wanted to talk to, this is the column that I had empty, it's called microschools. These are by definition small community-based schools offering very personalized education. Typically it's maybe 1 to 10 students, and the tuition is definitely paid by the family. Sometimes these microschools can apply for nonprofit status and get grants and other private domain donations, but in general it's a tuition based paid by the family. The key features are a very low student to teacher ratio. Like I said, you could have 1 to 3, you can have 1 to 10, and oftentimes these are very community based and focused on certain expectations that the parents have of the microschool. And then of course the curriculum is handpicked by the microschool and worked out with the parents. And it is oftentimes has an independent learning pace, so each child can actually have a learning pace separate from the other child's, because you might have mixed grades within the microschool. And it's often operated in an unconventional setting, meaning it could be in a person's home, it could be at a church, it could be at a local rec center, all kinds of things. It just depends on what the micro school and the facility owner has worked out. And that goes into the fifth column. Again, this is also funded by the family, but it is tuition based. So it does go from the family to a private organization. It doesn't just stay within the family. So that's why both private and micro schools have the same color here in the table, because there is tuition tied to both forms of private school as well as micro school. Okay, I wanted to jump in across these 5 different types: the governance and accountability and curriculum. We talked a little bit about that in each of the breakdowns, but I wanted to revisit this real quick so you could see them all side by side. So again, on the governance level, public and charter are both operated with some state and local board oversight. Public, of course, is completely within state regulations, and school boards' charters are within the contract they've agreed to with the state and the local boards. Accountability, both have student performances against state standards and the charter standard for accountability for charter schools. And both typically do have attendance requirements, meaning that if the child is not attending, has a lot of unexcused absences, it can actually go into a truancy situation. The curriculum for public is district and state designed, and the curriculum for charter schools is designed really driven by the charter that was agreed to between the charter school and the governing boards. Now let's move to the governance of private and micro school. Very similar, independently operated. And some states do have a little bit of standards around this. Texas does not have a whole lot, especially around micro schools. And then the accountability is, the accountability is really about the school, or maybe the affiliation standards. Maybe it's a Catholic school, and maybe the Catholic schools in a certain state or diocese have certain requirements and accountability for the schools that operate in the diocese. And sometimes there's an independent accreditation body that they submit their records and data to for their independent accreditation. On the case of the micro schools, though, accountability is really to the parents. They can issue, very much like a homeschool, transcripts and those kind of things, but they are not quite the same as an accredited school within the system. Even private schools have more accreditation than oftentimes micro schools do. And then the curriculum, in case of private, is school or affiliate designed, wide variety from religious to secular as well. And you can have very focused STEM-oriented private schools or heavy math, heavy science, those kind of things. And then the micro schools are curriculum is widely flexible, and might even have some heavy influence by the parent for their child on that micro school. And then the last, again, is homeschools. The governance is completely independent, ran by the family. Sometimes there's a little bit of state standards, but in the case of Texas, very, very light standards around homeschooling. Accountability is really about the parent and child relationship. And then the curriculum is a wide variety. The parents drive all of those decisions, and often the parent is the teacher. In the slide here, I also have a concept called unschooling. I wanted to just highlight this. We're going to talk a little bit about this maybe in the private model down the road, but unschooling is a concept within homeschools where you have not you're kind of detaching away from traditional academics schooling, where it's modules and packets and reading assignments and homework and all those kind of things we're traditionally used to. Unschooling is more experiential, allows the child to drive, do their learning more so on interest and non-conventional schooling. So, like let's say in the case of a biology, let's say the child is interested in tigers, and so instead of reading about it in books and those kind of things, maybe they go to the zoo and spend a couple days with the zoo with a program where they study the tigers with the zoo keepers and those kind of things. That would be kind of a more of an unschooling approach where you're doing non-conventional learning and education. Okay, the next one I wanted to talk about is the location of learning. I'm going to bring in a little bit different style here of the difference between, say, traditional education and these new online programs that are coming in. I want to bring this up because we are going to start to see a lot more online programs come about. I think in the future we have a lot of changes in the way kids can learn, and whether it be artificial intelligence, machine learning, those kind of things, our and personalized education are changing and giving us opportunities from technology that we just didn't have more than even 5 years ago, much less hundreds of years ago. So I want to talk about traditional versus online because that does kind of change some of the dynamics and way vouchers might be used in the future. So within traditional education, I have a table here that has public, charter, private, microschool, and homeschool in the top columns. And then, so if we look on the row called traditional education, the student attends a physical location. They go to the public school, they attend class, they sit in a classroom. Maybe in high school, they go from classroom to classroom through the hallways, those kind of things. Very, very used to that kind of a model where the child gets dropped off in the morning, picked up by the bus, those kind of things, and then comes home. Charter schools are often very similar to that. There's often a physical location. Child gets dropped off. The school provides the care and the education, and then they do their day and then come home. Some charter programs, we'll talk a little bit about some nuances to that when we get to the next line, the row called online. Now, in the case of private school, again, students typically go to the physical location of the private school, get dropped off, attend their classes, do their sports, those kind of things, and then come home. Micro schools, sometimes, well, they often will leave the house and then they'll go to a physical location. Sometimes this is a home or church or community center or something like that that the micro school has worked out. So the child does leave the home in the case of micro schools and attends the micro school and then comes home. And sometimes it's a couple days a week, sometimes it's every day, just depends on what the micro school's model is. And then the last column with traditionally homeschooling, the student attends that from home. They don't go to another outside physical location typically. Now, the next row I wanted to talk about is online programs. These are, especially since COVID, when all the kids had to take class from home, they 100% pretty much experienced an online model. And many actually really did do well with that. And when they could return, I think it's upwards of 30% didn't return right away. It's down to maybe about 3 or 4% to do online education, but um, many did not return right away because they thrived in the online model at home. So in the online model, so this is the online public column, students still attend a physical location. Oftentimes, the school district will consolidate these students that want to do an online program at a specific district school. So not all of the schools, let's say there's 5 high schools in the district, not all of them might provide this online program. They have one school that's focused as the school that's going to have the online classrooms, and the students come to that school to do their online education in a single room and still have oversight and do curriculum that's approved by the public programs. Charters, on the other hand, there's a lot more flexibility, especially in Texas here. I know there's at least 10 or 12 accredited, publicly accredited charter schools that have an online program. Some of these do have a physical location that the kid can do the online model, but still go into a physical location. Or they do a hybrid. Maybe they do some days at the physical location and some days they do it at home. But often, many of the kids in the state that are part of an online charter school, virtual school, we'll call it, they do take those classes from home. Still tuition free, paid for by the state, but they attend these online programs at home. Second is the third column is the private school model that's online. Very similar to charter. They can attend the physical location and do their online program if there's a specialty with that private school. They can do some days at the school and some days at home, or they can do all the days at home. So there's plenty of private online programs where 100% of the students all take those classes from home. And then we move to the micro school column. Again, this is all paid for by parents in a tuition model. Some micro schools have a physical location, and that the program is primarily an online delivery, or they can do hybrid or home. And then the last column of online homeschooling is the student can attend from home, or sometimes these local parents will build a co-op, and the co-op might meet in one of the family's home and the students come together some days or all days a week in a specific family home or location as part of a co-op, they call it. And it's can be part-time or full-time, so 5 days a week or 2 days a week, whatever the families in the co-op decide. Okay, and then the next slide talks about where is the teacher. Why is this important? Because, well, let's talk a little bit. Again, we have in the table, we have public, charter, private, micro schools, and home schools across the top. And then we have traditional schools and online schools. Now, this is a pretty heavy slide. Let's talk first about public traditional. So the teacher is typically physically in the room with the students, and typically there's a ratio of about 1 to 25 students in the room. So this is public traditional school. This is over 80% of the population typically in the U.S. and Texas are in a public model where the teacher is physically in the room teaching about a 1 to 25, maybe even 1 to 30 ratio. Charter schools in a traditional model are very similar. 1 to 25, teachers in the room physically with the students, and they're all learning at the same pace with the teacher presenting courseware and content. Private schools, very similar again to traditional. Teachers physically in the room with the students, ratios 1 to 25. Often with private schools, they can be much smaller, 1 to 15, those kind of things, if that's their focus as a private school with smaller ratios of teacher to student. Micro schools, oftentimes again, there is a physical teacher in the room with the students, but the ratios are very small, sometimes 1 to 2 or 1 to 8, or 1 to 10. So these micro schools have a very, very low ratio of mix between 1 to 2 or 1 to 8. And then home schools, of course, students attend with the parents as the teacher at the home. Very small. Sometimes it's a ratio of 1 to 1, or if you have 4 or 5 siblings, 1 to 5, or maybe that family's the co-op location and a couple of other kids come over. But again, this is traditional homeschooling. Now we move to the row called online. Again, this is talking about the location of where the teacher is. So in these public online programs, the teacher could either be live or in a recorded session, but there's oftentimes the way they teach it, there still is a teacher involved in the pain of the online program, and this can support one-to-many students. So you could have one teacher. Let's say it's an online program teaching chemistry. That one chemistry teacher online could teach 100 kids, or even 300 kids or 500, whatever, however many students are taking that chemistry class in the public offered online program. In charter programs, the teacher is online. This is getting to be very unique in our more recently in the last few years, where the teacher is either live, they could be recorded like the public school, but recorded and then self-paced by each student. And now we're starting to see charter schools that are bringing non-human AI bots that are allowing for very personalized content and self-paced. So again, we're starting to see in charter and in some of these other programs the use of AI and non-human education for teaching the kids, and this is allowing for personalized content and self-paced. This is something that we've never really had before in society, if you think about it. And typically a human in the loop teaches at one speed, and then the course curriculum and content, whether it's video, audio, or text, each student in the classroom, is presented the information at the same time in the same format. And of course, traditionally for the last hundreds of years, it's been text. We've only had video in the room for probably 50 years with the use of videotape. So in the 70s, probably that started with the big videotapes. And then now with online, we can present all kinds of integrated media in a manner that even pre-internet was very difficult to do. So with the advent of internet in the last 10 days with high-speed bandwidth and those kind of things, we can have all kinds of different content. And again, with these charter programs, one-to-many students without limitation, really. You can have a charter program that has 50 schools in the United States all teaching a similar program with all the students that are taking a chemistry or biology or a math, and one one teacher or this AI bot could be teaching them all. Private, online, very similar to charter. We have live recorded, and we have AI, not AI bots, where there's really no human teacher in the loop. An example of this in Texas is the Alpha School. They teach for 2 days, 2 hours a day, with AI bots, so no human teacher. And then the other 6 hours is kind of a format of the unschooling. That's why I wanted to bring unschooling up in the homeschool. This Alpha School, again, teaches 2 hours of academics, traditional academics, all online with an AI bot. And then the other 6 hours is for the student to explore their own interests, and they're heavily tied to outside programs. So maybe they go to the zoos, they go to a fire department, they have relationships with all kinds of different career-oriented programs to allow the kids to explore their interests in very non-academic ways, but still learning, but just non-traditional. Microschools, again, very similar to private. They could be live, online microschools. They could use live teachers that are interacting live. They could use recorded self-paced programs. They can use AI bots, and again, one-to-many students. So these microschools now could, support flexibly however many kids they want. If they come in and they do online, they could, um, again, in this case, though, the microschool has a curriculum that's set up, and so all the kids take the same curriculum. It's just they could be at different self-paces if they're doing the AI bots. And the last one, again, is online homeschool. Again, the family enrolls in an online program. The teacher is an online teacher, though, not the parent in this case. So very similar to a microschool, they could be live or they could be recorded. Or you're starting to see some of these online programs for homeschoolers that are leveraging these non-human AI bots. An example is the Khan Academy. Khan Academy is free, has free classes that people can take. And in the case of Texas, we have our TEACS curriculum in Khan Academy. So you can theoretically take all your public school education curriculum in Khan Academy for free. And they have a bi-directional AI bot that could be overlaid for $4 a month for a family, so very cheap, that you could basically get the Texas curriculum for free being taught by an AI bot for $4 a month. Very, very affordable, and they're getting actually the public schools curriculum delivered right to their home via a online program that's only $4 a month. Again, in that case, because it's an AI bot or even live or recorded, you can have a one-to-many student limit. There's no limitation. So one teacher could teach 1,000 kids in their program, whether it's live or recorded, and then you would just have a support system to pick up grading of maybe essays and those kind of things. So you'd have some support within these programs that the families have paid for. Okay, there's another model that I wanted to bring up. It really is to support this online. That's why I wanted to break out the traditional versus the online. So we have the online program. I wanted to share this again. The student attends at a physical location, often consolidated by the school district. In charters, again, online, the student might attend at a physical location or from home, or it could be a hybrid scenario. So maybe a couple days a week they come into a physical location. Again, this is online. In a private program, student might attend physically, like a charter location, home, or a hybrid. Or in the microschool, again, student might attend a physical location, home, or in a hybrid scenario. And then online, homeschools, students might attend from home, or sometimes the families generate their own little co-op, which was very close to what microschools are, but there's no tuition assigned to those. So that's the difference between a co-op style school and a microschool, is that microschools still do have a tuition tied to them, but co-ops typically don't. Now this support system is something that I've actually put together. It's called an online learning center, and it really provides an alternative to only attending from home. Okay, so of course with public schools, they already provide a physical location for kids to come. But with charter programs, remember, some of these charter programs, they do not have a physical location close to the family. So the choice is only that the child attends from home. even though they're in a charter program, similarly for a private program, or even similar for a micro school. If the case is where the online program only provides for a home attendance option, and again, homeschool falls in this as well, the Learning Center can be a location where the child goes partial, like 2 or 3 days or 5 days a week, and they take their online program from at the Learning Center. Now, the Learning Center is not a school. They're not tied to any curriculum. They're not tied to any kind of affiliation. They're not regulated by any state authority or unless, of course, it's younger kids, and there might be some daycare regulations that would fall into that. But what this provides is the caring aspect. If you think about school, when you drop off your kid at school, they provide two major components. They provide the education, which is obvious, but they're also caring for your child. Now, in the case of online, all that they can provide is the education piece. There's a caring piece that's missing. And so oftentimes when kids are at home, they feel certain things with isolation or they just want to have some peer time and spend time with friends. And so with these learning centers, the kid can come there a couple days a week or 5 days a week, whatever the parents want and the child wants, and they would have time with other kids. They're in completely different online programs, but they would then have time that they can have lunch together, social time together, and of course they have breakout times, and maybe they even have some group workshop projects where they sit together and they work on the robotics or a software program or entrepreneurial things with business plans or something like that, where they come together and they do teamwork. Maybe they have a debate program. Maybe they have other things that they would not normally be able to do at home or even that their online program provides. Maybe music classes, those kind of things that they can do at the online learning center. So I just wanted to add that. And if you want to go to onlinelearningcenters.net, you can see an example of one of these programs that's up and running. Right now, it's only in Fort Worth, Texas. Okay, so now we move to the types of the schools and the possible voucher usages. Okay, so I do have a little funding legend in some of these slides, just so it reminds you which ones are free and which ones have costs. So within the possible voucher usage, so in the traditional, we have public and charter schools. They are already funded by the state, so there will be no voucher use for public and charter because they're already funded. They're already free. There's no cost to the families for public and charter programs. Now, traditional private schools, yes, for sure. That's really something that they're trying to help defray some of the costs. Now, I think the average price of a private school in Texas is over $11,000. And what we're talking about, what I've seen in the legislation, is between $8,000 and $10,000 for support to families. So many of the private schools are $20,000 or more. So in some cases, there might not be enough money to completely pay all the tuition, but the intent is for the voucher program to help with some private school. And then we've seen some of the legislation models where it's called an educational savings account, where the families do get to use it for anything education related. There might be some reviews associated with using the money, but in those cases, yes, the micro schools and homeschooling would have had some funds tied to the voucher program in past legislation that they could use. So that's why I said possibly yes. But we know the voucher program is going to definitely support private schools. The micro schools and homeschooling, we have yet to see what the final or what the draft legislation is yet to see if it's going to be more like the education savings accounts. Now let's move to the online row. Again, public and charter won't have any funding for online schools, but you could have private online schools that would definitely be supportive of that. And there's plenty of those out there that are private online schools, purely online, but private. And then again, there might be some micro schools and homeschools that are online micro schools and online programs that homeschoolers or micro schoolers could leverage with vouchers. And then now let's go to the Online Learner Center that I just brought up in the previous presentation. In the case of public schools and charter schools, they would not be covered as part of the um, uh, charter voucher program, but parents could still pay to have their child in an online learning center out of pocket without vouchers if they were in a charter program. So the charter program would be free tuition wise, but they could pay for the online learning center support as a additional cost to the family that isn't covered by vouchers. But private micro schools and homeschools, we'll see. There, with the legislation, if it is sort of a educational savings account, I could see where private micro school and homeschools could leverage these online centers, and this would fall under basically the same thing as tutoring. So a lot of times in the education savings accounts, ESAs, they did have the ability to use it for tuition, and that would be very similar to this online learning center model. So this last slide I'm providing here is comparing the types of schools in the area of governance, funding, accessibility, and voucher use. So in the case of public, governance is government, funding is public funds, accessibility is free and open to all, voucher use, no. Charter, independent governments, funding is public and private. It's free, but you have to apply to the charter school, and they have to have enough openings. Again, voucher use, no, because it's already paid for with public funds. Private schools, independent governance, tuition and donations is the funding source. Accessibility, family have to pay for it, and it is selective. You have to apply and get selected to be in the private school. The voucher use is yes, they're definitely going to be able to use vouchers for private school. All the legislation has always had voucher use for private school. Next, we move to micro schools. Independent, tuition is private, funding is private. You pay for it, and it's limited. It's limited to how many kids are available at that micro school. So a local community might only be handle 10 kids. And the voucher use, possibly, depending upon the legislation in the program that's yet to be presented for review. Homeschools, again, the governance is family-led, family-funded. Accessibility is flexible, but it's family-led. And then voucher use, probably we're going to have some form of stipend for homeschoolers. Whether it's the full amount or not, we'll have to see that a private student would have. And then the online learning center model, independent, depending upon age and the daycare regulations, meaning that in Texas, daycare laws end at 13, or 13 is the last age, so 14 to 17 is not covered by daycare regulations. So there'd be a lot of flexibility in what these online centers could support. But if it's like 10 to 13, there might be some daycare regulations that would have to be followed. Funding right now is family funded, meaning the family pays for attendance to these online learning centers. It's paid and limited with application, meaning that it is a private organization. So they have acceptance criteria as well. Limited, usually these are going to be, maybe 50 seats open at the center or more, generally probably not more than 100. But it is limited. It's not like a public school that has to absorb every child in the district. And then voucher use, possibly. We'll have to see how the legislation goes. If it moves towards the education savings accounts, then that would be available to families. All right, so choosing the right fit. Again, with all this presented, each school type offers unique benefits and challenges. Some of the considerations for the choice is the child's learning style. Many will learn better at home, whether it's bullying or their anxieties around going to school. Sometimes they just learn better at home. And then oftentimes with these online programs, you can have children that have different learning disabilities, or they have different preferences for learning, whether it's visual, video, auditory. I know I'm an auditory learner, and I would have done really well in school if I could have had audiobooks instead of textual books. Even though I've got grad school degrees and I read just fine, I do absorb information better with audio, and I can go through a lot more courseware and content audio-wise than text. That's just the way my brain works. And others are much more visual. So if you taught a class on history, you could teach it with video, you could teach it with audio, you could teach it with textbooks, and each child could learn independently of each other in their learning style, but in the end, take the same exams to show what they've learned. And then, of course, family resources and priorities. Sometimes there's concerns about, dual income families. Both parents leave the house, so maybe homeschooling is a challenge. But they still want their kid to be in a different type of program than what's offered in the public schools in the area. So those kind of things you have to look at, and that's really kind of what this online learning centers is. That allows for families that maybe would struggle to have an online program at home. They can leverage the online learning center and have the child get dropped off and picked up at the learning center, and then they can do the online program there, kind of get the best of both. And then, of course, accessibility and legal requirements, something to think about there. So final thoughts. An informed decision ensures the best educational outcomes for your child. Every child is different. Every child in a classroom is different. If you have 25 kids in a classroom, there's 25 different learning styles, 25 different learning speeds. And now with the technology that's available that wasn't even available 5 years ago, every child can be taught at their own pace and their own learning style. And that's the future, and that's what's coming. And so the vouchers aren't about just maybe giving money to the people in private school. It's about providing for newer, more cost-effective models for educating our kids. So thanks for listening. Again, our website's talkingtexasvouchers.com. There's a lot of resources there. We'll have links to the legislation information. We have links to news, other articles. We put everything we can find up there, so there's no bias at all to the site. The podcast is on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We also have a YouTube channel, youtube.com at Talking Texas Vouchers. Email talkingtexasvouchers@gmail.com. This is created and produced by Innovative Education Systems, LLC, and Lift Up Online Learning Centers. And you can read more about and see more about that at onlinelearningcenters.net. Thank you, and hope your day goes great.